Welcome, everyone. I see that more attendees are still joining. However, we will start with the webinar as planned. So welcome to our webinar, How to Find the Right Journal and Fix Your Manuscript Before Submission. I hope you'll find this webinar to be extremely helpful in achieving a hassle-free and hassle-free submission to the journal. I am Dr. Gayatri Phadke. Let's start with the webinar. Sujata, if you could. During the webinar, you can send in your questions using the chat or Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will pick up some relevant questions during the course of the webinar itself, but majority of the questions will be handled and answered at the end of the presentation. So let's begin with the introductions. Joining me today is Dr. Sujata Basu. She's currently the Manager of Quality Management and Training Team at Enago Publication Support. Having pursued her PhD in biochemistry, she has since then worked in the academic and academic publishing sector for 12 plus years. She is herself an experienced author with multiple publications, either in journals or as books, with a variety of well-known publishers such as Springer, Elsevier, Taylor, and Francis, so on. She currently leads the quality and training team at Publication Support, which is an arm of Enago, and therefore is extremely familiar with how to manage the quality of publication support services and how to advise client authors through their publication journey to a successful one. So thank you, Sujata, for joining us. A little bit about myself. I hold a PhD in chemistry and a master's degree in analytical chemistry. I currently manage the client servicing team of Enago Publication Support. And on a routine basis, we do attend to our clients and authors' queries about how to best utilize our services and how to achieve an error-free submission. So in addition to that, I have also been part of the major product launches at Enago, such as the research impact services. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll get right to the agenda of this webinar. So we will first start with how to choose the right journal and how to meet the journal standards so as to not get a desk rejection. This will be followed by some advice on how to mitigate plagiarism related concerns in the manuscript, as well as how to assess your manuscript from peer review aspect so that you can minimize rejections during peer review. So let's begin with the journey of a manuscript from an author's desk to the journal editor's desk. And I will start with a question for you, Dr. Basu. So where on the entire writing journey should an author start identifying the right journals for their manuscript?
Thank you, Gayatri. Hello, and thank you all for joining this webinar today. Let's go deeper into the journey of a manuscript from an author's desk to the journal editor's desk. At the start, the paper is at the author's desk, where he is ready with the title of the paper. The abstract is written well, which focuses on the core research essentials of the paper. The introduction, followed by the materials and methods section, which details all the experiments that were conducted to prove the research hypothesis, followed by results, discussion, and finally the conclusion of the research findings. We will take you through this journey of selecting the target journal through various phases. We start with phase 1, which is the initial draft of the paper. We request the authors to ensure by rereading the entire content that the details in each section mentioned above, they correlate and support your research objectives. We also advise you to read the different sections of your paper and share it with your colleagues, with the researchers in your team, who can share their honest views about the clarity and scientific accuracy of presentation of the content. Accordingly, based on your right judgment about your research, please go ahead and revise the sentences or sections to bring it up to the mark of the target journal requirement. We come to phase 2 here, where we start the target journal selection from the number of papers that you have referred while preparing your research study, where you have gone through multiple research details in these published papers, and you have also listed some of them in your research paper. Refer to these published papers that you have read while writing the paper. For an example, let us start with an arbitrary number of around 30 papers that were referred. Please go through the abstract and the method section of these papers and identify those papers which have similar or related experimental approach. When we say about experimental approach, we refer to the procedures that were obtained through the data selections, the research methods that were employed in order to prove the research objectives of your study. Based on this assessment, let us say that we have shortlisted 20 papers from out of 30. That is the point where we started. Now, these remaining 10 papers, these were the ones which focused mainly on the supposed physiology and treatment regimes, which you have used or discussed in detail under the introduction and the discussion section of your paper. These are the two sections where a researcher talks on a comparative tone about the research findings or the research objectives in his paper to that what has already been published till date in the papers available online. Hence, let us not consider these set of 10 papers ahead. We proceed with the 20 shortlisted papers here. At this point, we often come across researchers who expect their paper to be published in high quality and high impact factor journals. However, please note that the quality assessment of your research is a very, very crucial factor that needs to be considered before making the final decision for the target journal. In order to take you through this assessment process, we have considered a sample manuscript, the title of which shows that the paper is focused on type 2 diabetes, and it is a qualitative study. Some of the content here has been blinded from a confidentiality point of view. As we start the target journal selection, there may be several journal requirements in the author's mind. For an example, they may wish to publish the paper in journals that are indexed in Web of Science or PubMed, or even both. They may be looking for journals which are specialized in their research field for a specific audience. In this case, they may be expert clinicians in diabetes. We go ahead with the third requirement, which the authors may have in mind, that is best quality journals, followed by open access journals in contrast to subscription-based, which have a fee component attached to it, and journals which are in the impact factor range of, say, 2 to 10. In this case study, we have taken the abstract from the sample paper. Much of the content here has been blinded from the confidentiality point of view. However, please note here as well, the authors may have certain journals of choice in their mind where they may wish to submit the paper. On the left, we can see some of the preferences as BMJ Open, Health and Quality of Life Outcomes, Journal of Diabetes and Metabolic Disorders, and Diabetes Care. On the right, we can see the abstract section. There are certain red highlighted text. This is where I would want you to focus because these are the key essential words taken from this content, which reflects the core research focus of the paper. This paper, as we can see, is focused on the population which has type 2 diabetes mellitus. The factors taken into consideration are psychological factors as well as social stress factors. And the authors here are attempting to modify these factors in order to improve the clinical outcome in the type 2 diabetes patients. Let us now understand certain why and how of certain queries that the authors may still have in mind before they start searching for the target journals. Why all the journals that are preferred by the authors may or may not be the right fit for the paper. We shall also understand why should the lower impact factor journals be preferred mostly, but at the same time, let us also judge if high impact factor journal should be chosen for the paper. How to know if a journal has a fast decision time, and several more such queries in the author's mind. We now proceed ahead with phase 2, where we continue with our target journal search. We started with the 20 papers filtered in the first stage. At this point, we request the authors, please go through the results carefully in these 20 papers and judge to what extent they stand different or related to one another. In this way, you will be able to create an idea in your mind about how different or related are your result details in comparison to these papers. For a visual representation, we have shared a table here where the essential research points that we have considered on the left-hand side, first column, the first point is research focused on the social and psychological factors in these papers. Second, whether the authors have discussed about close interactions among these factors. And third, whether there was an insight provided or discussed or assessed into the glycemic control strategies. Now, as you can see, we have categorized those 20 papers, considering they were into unique journals, as 20 journals in mind, and we have them under category 1, 2, and 3, with distributions falling as 10 journals under category 1, 5 and 5 each in category 2 and 3 respectively. All the research focus parameters on the left, their relevance in these categories are marked as yes, which is a high compliance and highly discussed content, or a partial yes, where it has been moderately discussed or proved through certain experiments in these papers, or a complete no, because these parameters, we could not find them in some of these papers.
So, Sujata, it does appear that most authors should choose one of the journals that appear in category 1 or category 3. But what do you do when your journal is when your paper is very interdisciplinary? And let's say majority of the journals may be falling into category 2 or 3. Are there any other factors that authors should consider?
Yes, Gayatri. So let us look ahead for phase 2 continuation. On the 10 journals that we have listed and 5 and 5, under the categories, we have mentioned few of the journals that fall in these categories. As you can see, there are a lot of journal parameters in the STM industry which can be taken into consideration in order to understand the research quality and the standard of each journal. All these journals may look relevant based on the keywords that we have seen in our previous slides and the title of the paper. However, if you see the uniqueness, some journals have a very high impact factor like 47.564. Even we have certain journals which are good in indexing category, which are SCIE index. However, they have no impact factor yet. Also, on the quartile ranking, which is indicated through Q1 until Q4, we can see certain journals which have indexing. However, they fall into quartile 3 or 4 category, the highest quartile rankings being Q1 and Q2. We now move ahead of phase 2, where we want to filter down these 20 journals into further down. Among these 3 categories, each of the journals were assessed based on these focus areas where we have seen the social and psychological factors being discussed in the papers in these journals. We have also looked into the sample size because it is an important factor which after all decides the weightage of the data that is obtained at the end of your study. We also look into the close interactions among these factors which were reported. The study type, which is very important factor, the cross-sectional study or a systematic review or even a meta-analysis that was done. Finally, we also take another research criteria into consideration, whether these journals had papers which had insight into glycemic control strategies and to what extent. The STM parameters, the journal quality determiners, we have taken into consideration the indexed databases, which we have seen in our table, the impact factor of each of the journals, the journal audience in focus, and the journal ranking. Based on this, we advise you that it is highly important that you do a research scope match with the aim and scope of each of the journals. This is essential for us to understand whether the journal's core focus areas of research are in alignment with your research paper. Also, please do check the quality alignment of the research in your paper when in comparison to the journal parameters that we have seen for each of the journals.
So all of this actually sounds very exhaustive way of searching for a journal. But I'm sure as a new researcher, you may spend a lot of time then identifying which journal to use or which journal to, even shortlist. So are there no automated tools available in the market that one could use or refer to?
Right, Gayatri. So let us come to the next slide. Although we have here the categorized journals where we have shortlisted now 3 from the category 1. We have avoided category 2 journals because they did not fall in complete alliance to our research paper, and category 3 where we have shortlisted 2 journals. As a whole, as you can see, from a total of 20, we have now filtered based on several assessment parameters into a total of 5 journals. Let us move ahead to understand through the online search tools or journal finders, can we find these journals that we have segregated and filtered now most relevant and suggested by even the journal finders? So there are several journal finders provided by the publishers in the STM industry. Why are these tools essential for a researcher? Because they have their extensive databases of research information. Based on online available information, they match your title of the paper and the few essential keywords from the abstract and help you identify the closely matched journals where you can submit the paper. Now, as we can see, for an example, through the Elsevier Journal Finder, which actually compares your paper and searches the database containing greater than 2,500 journals into various aspects of research or scope. For one suggestion that we have picked from the entire list, this is diabetes research and clinical practice. As you can see, there are a lot of other journal metrics that they present along with this search to help the authors understand more about the appropriateness of a journal for the paper. For an example, we can see the impact factor of this journal being 8.180 with a site score of 9.5. We also come to know about the acceptance rate, which is 15%, and time to first decision being 3 weeks. At the end of phase 3, we come now to phase 4, where we will start our confirmation of the target journals that we have in mind until now through an online search process. If you can remember those red highlighted text, which were the essential keywords from the paper, we can take these keywords and search for similar published papers by pasting them on online search engines like PubMed, Google Scholar, RefSeq, and any other such tools which are trustworthy. For your convenience, we have presented the abstract once again here. You can visualize the important parameters or the keywords that we have taken into consideration. So these are physical illness, type 2 diabetes, and psychological stress. We proceed ahead now on this slide where we can see the search results, how we can identify whether the search results obtained, these papers, are they most relevant to your research paper. You can see the keywords evident through the bold blue text: psychological stress, type 2 diabetes, and even stress disorder. Once we have obtained this list, we shall go through all the steps that we have now understood in phase 2. Please go through the methods and results section in these papers. Note the difference and similarity among them with that of your paper, as discussed in our previous slides. Make a list of the journals in which these papers were published. Say, at this stage, we have shortlisted 3 journals from this search attempt. In phase 5 of this journey, we now have carefully selected 8 journals. We now proceed to choose the first target journal for your paper. Please read the recently published articles in these 8 journals. When we say recently, we request you to look through the most relevant papers that match your paper in the last 2 to 3 years. The extent of similarity will definitely vary among these 8 journals, and this will give you an understanding of the research interest areas of each of these journals for your paper. Based on all these assessments, we now shortlist 4 journals. At this point, it is very important for you to ensure that none of these journals are predatory journals. Also, please maintain a clear statistical analysis and data interpretation to convey the research strength clearly to the journal's editor. After we have identified the suitable journals, there is a question in the author's mind. Do we need to ensure any other details in the paper in order to meet the journal standard? Hence, there comes the Enago journal experts. While these are the activities that we have seen in selecting 4 to 5 best suitable journals for your paper, they are as well executed by the Enago expert. There are yet some more essential parameters that they assess before listing down the final set of journals in the Journal Selection Assistant report. Among the assessment parameters that the experts consider, there are the suitability of other journals as per the author's preference, the compatibility with the publication scope and the submission guidelines, an estimate of the peer review time on the publication cycle and the frequency, whether the journals are open access or subscription based or both. They also look into the article processing charges in case the authors have a requirement of a specified, APC, and any other associated fees that the journal may have during the submission process. Any other prerequisites of the journals that may be essential for the authors to ensure before they proceed with submission of the final version of the paper to the journal are also considered by the Enago expert. Let us now have a look into a part of this report where the expert has listed down the final set of 4 journals for this paper. As you can see, Journal of Medical Internet Research, Journal of Diabetes Investigation, they are placed in the first section, which is based on authors' preferences that were prioritized by the expert, as well as the paper's research compliance. We can also look into the number of issues published by each of these journals, 12 indicating that the journal publishes each month and has a fast publication time. Likewise, at the bottom, we can also see a note placed by the expert because we had started with certain set of journals which the authors had in mind as a preference, where they wished to submit the paper. In case during this entire journal assessment process, the expert identifies that one or two or maybe none of them are relevant for the paper based on the research quality assessment, it is here where they convey to the authors through appropriate parameters and information why those journals were not considered to be suitable for the paper. This is a glimpse of a section of this report where we try to share with you the comments that the expert has placed in order to help the author understand why BMJ Open Diabetes Research and Care was one of the selection among the best 4 that they have considered for the paper. As we can see, they have taken into consideration the acceptance rate of the journal and acceptance to publication time, the indexing parameters, and the fast publication as well. The scope match is, of course, a priority in every assessment process. We also share certain similar research articles that had been published in this journal in the last 2 to 3 years to help the authors refer to these articles and understand how the research has been presented. And that is how this target journal would expect you as well to present your research in the paper. So this is a brief overview of the final evaluation process, wherein the scope match, journal audience, impact factor were the factors that were taken into consideration. Essentially, the broad range of journal metrics that were also considered were the acceptance rate, peer review time, time from acceptance to publication, site score. Besides these parameters, the originality of your paper is a very important factor because there has to be new findings essentially reported for the paper to stand out right among all the submissions that the journal will be receiving at that particular point of time. Precision in your experimental analysis and data presentation is a must that every author should ensure in the paper.
So let's say that an author has gone through their own assessment, provided us some suggestions, and we also provided them the report. However, it does still appear that the final decision as to the first journal that an author should attempt is still their decision, right?
Right.
So what is your advice for authors to select the very first journal that they will approach? Because out of those 4 journals, some had higher impact factor, some were, non-compliant with the author requirements. So how does one go about finalizing the journal?
Right, Gayatri. So this is the next step that we would advise the authors to implement. Based on the keywords that we have finalized, and we have done the online searches, we have looked into papers relevant in all the journals that we had in mind until the stage where we have segregated it and filtered it down to 4. Please take those keywords and do a search for similar or related articles in, say, 2 of these best suitable journals. For an example, we have taken BMJ Open Diabetes Research and Care and Journal of Diabetes Investigation for us to understand this case better. In this target journal selection process, you will be finding a list of relevant articles published in recent years by these 2 journals. Please look into these findings in comparison to how or to what extent your paper stands original as compared to them. Of course, as we discussed, the precision in experimental analysis and data is unique to your paper and needs to be ensured by you only. Please also look into the English language clarity, because this is how you will be able to understand from these published papers the language, the scientific language that has been presented by the published papers. And this is how the journal readers would find it comfortable as well to read your paper and understand it better. The scientific construction of your scientific arguments in the paper are also essential for you to take care. Now, just a brief on the steps that we have seen to assess these parameters. We have used the keywords, the physical illness, type 2 diabetes, and psychological stress. Using them, we have searched for related articles in these journals those were published in the last 3 to 5 years. Read these articles thoroughly and understand the scientific presentation that is acceptable by them. Accordingly, please judge the experimental approach of these published scientists, and you can identify the potential improvement areas in your research paper right away. After the thorough review of the paper's content in comparison to these similar articles, we finally conclude here on our first target journal for the paper, which is Journal of Diabetes Investigation. Based on several potential positive factors that we have seen, these are strong aim and scope match of the paper, the impact factor, which is moderate enough because it is 3.681, the high acceptance rate of the journal, that is 40%, submission to first decision, which is fast enough, that is 30 days, and a high site score, which is 6.1. Now, you may have a question in mind. Why have we not considered BMJ Open Diabetes Research and Care for this paper? Because one of the reasons being it has a lower impact factor than this journal, which is the acceptance rate being 25%. It has a little more high impact factor, 4.275, and a low site score, which is 4.2. Several other parameters which were taken into consideration during this judgment process and coming down to this Journal of Diabetes Investigation as our target journal now. At this point, when we have the journal in mind, please assess the content of your paper for plagiarism through a plagiarism tool checker. Please add most closely matched references that you have observed during this entire journey and support your research statements in the paper evidently through the most relevant and latest articles that you can find online. This is how you can convey to the journal's editor that you are well aware of the research developments in this field and you are now thorough and sure enough that these are the research objectives which can bring in more future light to the researchers in this scope. Please polish the English language and grammar of the research content and format the text, figures, tables, references as per the target journal instructions.
Right, that was very, very useful, Sujata, no doubt. But I had a question before we get into plagiarism and other things. Some of these criteria or parameters are not very easily accessible. So we saw that the journal search can perhaps give you the acceptance rate and so on. But submission to decision time is something that is very variable. And not most publishers actually publish that it might lead to fewer submissions or other such, potential issues. So what is the way an author can figure out an approximate peer review time or acceptance time? Because I can imagine that being a major factor when you're very close to PhD completion or you have a hard deadline to achieve certain number of publications in a year.
Exactly, Gayatri. So that's an evident question that researchers have in mind at this stage. So let us proceed to the next slide where we see the journal turnaround time and how we can possibly gauge or maybe identify such information. So as we know, the first decision time of most journals, they can vary widely. And many journals, they attempt to make an initial decision within 2 to 4 weeks of receipt of the manuscript. However, at this stage, our target journal, which is Journal of Diabetes Investigation, is a widely published journal, and it has presented the information about submission to first decision on its journal webpage. This was rather easy to find for the author. But what if in case these information or details are not available on the journal's webpage? There are other ways through which we can gauge. You can look into the number of issues that a journal has published. For an example, at the center screenshot, we can see this journal publishes papers every month. So this is a continuous publication process, indicating a rather fast publication process. On the others, we can see that on the published article webpage, there are information like submitted date, revised date, even the published date. These are the dates which can give you an idea on the journals, on the articles published webpage, to what extent are the time gaps between each of these stages. We shall move ahead now to understand how we can ensure that the paper is plagiarism free. So plagiarism, as we know, is an intentional or otherwise an ethical violation that could lead to outright rejection of the paper once it is submitted to the journal, and it can even damage your credibility as an author. The extent of plagiarism in a research paper can vary from a minimal plagiarized content to a moderate or even a highly plagiarized text. Let us take an example of a minimal plagiarized content. As you can see in the plagiarism report, the similarity index percentage is 5. The text here that is highlighted in red is the plagiarized content, and this was taken from the first paper that is listed in the plagiarism report. Once this content has been edited, the editor was able to remove the plagiarism in this section of the paper. How do we ensure at this stage that the plagiarism is removed? We run the paper, this paper, through the tool once again and obtain the plagiarism percentage. We can also visibly see there are no color highlights indicating that the editing has been able to remove the plagiarized content. While we do so, please note that the plagiarized sections of this manuscript are differently coded through different colors, and they are marked with the source number for your reference in the plagiarism report. Groups of words that are lesser than 5 in the text, they do not account for plagiarism. Please check for any groups of 6 or more words highlighted in your paper and attempt to reword them carefully. Ensure that the scientific expression of these revised sentences are retained, and please avoid unnecessary edits because it may lead to loss of essential information when you are almost ready with your paper for submission. Let us also look into how the manuscript plagiarism check work. The Enago experts, they assess the originality of your paper's content with the Authenticate software, which is a leading plagiarism software available for researchers. They provide a report and advise the authors on how they can reduce the repetitions in the text. The report will highlight content that is flagged for repetition with links to the source of duplicated content. The experts will also examine the flagged passages to determine the plagiarized parts and suggest the authors how they can address them. We take an example of a highly plagiarized report. 52% similarity index is rather high. As we can see in the excerpt taken from the paper, the content is completely red highlighted, indicating high plagiarism. And this content has been taken as is from the first paper listed in the report, which accounts for 40% plagiarism in the entire paper. Once the content has been edited and we have run the paper through the tool once again, the plagiarism percentage has been reduced to 31%. In the edited section, you can see there are still certain color-coded text. However, there are certain software-related information or statistical information, which are rather often used by researchers in their research paper, and they do not account for the plagiarism.
So seems like, the author is doing their best to ensure there is no rejection. They're searching for the right journal, they're making sure that their research is novel. Uh, how important do you think it is that they get their paper read by somebody else and get some type of feedback on it before submission? I mean, after having done this much work, extending the submission further can really eat into that timeline you may have set for yourself.
Right, Gayatri. So this is where we come to understand why a peer review is important for the paper. So the manuscript, it goes through several phases of refinement and adjustment as it adopts itself to a better version and gets ready for submission to the target journal. Now, at this stage, we would advise the authors to share their paper with their fellow colleagues or researchers in the team who can help share their views about the research accuracy, the clarity in presentation of content, maybe even the English language accuracy, based on which these honest views can be taken ahead by you in order to enhance the research content or the presentation in the paper before you submit to the journal. Besides this, upon submission, please note that the journal's editor and peer reviewers, they even conduct a rigorous review of your paper. Hence, a pre-submission review would help to fill in all the gaps that may be prevalent in the research paper from content or from data point of view, or even maybe from an English language accuracy point of view. Hence, it will help you to avoid desk rejection. As we move ahead, we will look into the scientific merit assessment parameters of the paper. The comprehensive explanation about your research background in the introduction section of the paper should be ensured. Please also look into whether the methodology that has been detailed are rigorous enough with adequate sample size detailed in the methods section. Statistical analysis accuracy is a must for every possible assessment that you can conduct based on the data that you have obtained through your experiments. Please clearly reflect the findings in the results section, and remember, they should not have been published in any of your previous publications. Next is where we bring forth a smooth and logical flow of research content in the paper while you discuss your findings in comparison to the existing literature. Finally, the English language and grammar of the paper should be clear, correctly represented, and it should be easily understandable. At this point, we would also like to advise our authors to take this opportunity to avail an expert reviewer from Enago. This reviewer would be able to provide you with an unbiased review of your entire paper, looking into various research aspects, looking into the scientific strength of the paper, and helping you understand on all the possible ways that you can enhance the paper presentation in order to bring it up to the mark of the target journal requirements. Please note that this would be an opportunity for this expert to reflect on your work and provide thoughtful comment, helping you ensure that your arguments are clear and they have no unanswered research questions yet to be addressed for the readers of the journal. On the parameters that can be considered while you assess the review or you review the parameters or the research content in the paper, please perform an extensive literature review by using various keywords from the paper. You can read these articles carefully and gauge the amount of the details provided to explain the research background in comparison to what are the objectives that you have tried to put forth in your paper. Identify the methods that were applied in order to prove their hypothesis and understand how the results are interpreted by them in these papers. Compare your observations gathered from these published articles with that in each section of your paper and identify ways to express the content more convincingly as preferred by the journal's editors and readers. In this way, you will be able to assess the extent of originality and significance that your results hold in comparison to these existing research developments in this field. Apart from this, also strengthen your paper by performing any of the following activities. At this stage, you can even add more data from other experiments that you have conducted during your research. You can even add latest published papers as references and support your research statements in the introduction and discussion sections further. This is how you will ensure that your research details stand unique in the current scenario. At this point, please ensure no content in the paper is used from published sources. Also, ensure that the English language type is as per the journal's requirement if they have specified about it. Finally, please revise the paper based on all the above observations and parameters, and now you are ready to proceed with submission to the journal.
That was great, Dr. Basu. That was very helpful, and I'm sure our attendees find it to be the same. So very quickly, we have already gotten a couple of questions, and I see two of our attendees have raised their hands. We request you to share your questions over chat or over the Q&A function, which will appear at the bottom of your screen, so that you will be able to send your question in advance and we can answer it in the order that we receive them. And as a special thank you from us for attending this webinar, we have a special discount offer on your screen right now. This offer is available on Enago Publication Support packages. We provide two levels of packages, one for early researchers and one for established researchers. The full support package actually covers some of the services that Dr. Basu talked about today, including the journal recommendation service, the pre-submission peer review service, as well as plagiarism check service. In addition to that, it also provides services that will help you finalize your manuscript, including editing as well as submission check. Now, if you're an experienced researcher, you could also go for our Easy Go package that will only focus on the final presentation and editing of the manuscript. So thank you very much for attending, and we will shortly start with the questions that we have already received in the order that we have received them. So thank you once again, Sujata, and I'm sure there'll be many questions for us to answer. So beginning with the first couple on plagiarism check. So we have a question from one of our attendees. Do you have a system to identify plagiarism over multiple languages? So basically identifying plagiarism in an English manuscript where it was, let's say, copied from another language such as Japanese or Korean or Chinese.
Yeah. So I believe we can assist with the translation service. We can ideally, majority of the research content being available in English language. So the research papers, which may be in any of the languages, we can assist the authors in getting them translated into English, and the research paper as such in the English language version can be run through the plagiarism tool, and we can assess the extent of plagiarism in it.
I believe the plagiarism tool that we most rely on, Authenticate, which is used worldwide, I think it compares only the same language, right?
Same language.
I believe. So it will compare English to English and Japanese to Japanese and so on.
Yes.
Yeah. However, is it really plagiarism if you use Japanese text and simply translate it as it is? I mean, is that advisable to publish in that manner?
Well, while we translate the Japanese text research content into English, it will automatically take a new outlook when we represent it in a different language. And
Right.
of course, with the help of the tool, we can ensure right away whether we need to edit or proofread it in order to ensure there are no similarities in the research expression in comparison to the online content available on similar lines.
Yeah. So I guess if I understand you correctly, if it is an unpublished Japanese text, then we are okay with translating to
Yes.
English without worrying about plagiarism.
Yes.
But same cannot be said if it's a published Japanese paper that you're translating.
Right.
There has to be
Uniqueness.
additional research. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope that answers the question. We have another question on plagiarism about whether there are any free plagiarism detection software. So I have briefly done some search on this, and it does appear that there are quite a few plagiarism softwares. But I think the key here is to understand which sources are scanned during the plagiarism check. Can you shed some light on that, and why perhaps a free software may not necessarily work in terms of what journals are recommending?
Right. So ideally, we have several online plagiarism check tools available, some of them being paid and some being unpaid versions. Because your research is very unique to yourself, and this is a hard work and very potential information, which is yet to be published or yet to come forth to the research world. A certain paid versions of the plagiarism checker tools would be the preferred ones, which can ensure the confidentiality of your research information on such online platforms. Also, the paid versions have rather more intricate and sophisticated parameters for, assessing the similarity of your research paper as compared to a huge or a vast amount of research information at the back end. So ideally, we would advise authors to go ahead with the paid version, which is rather more trustworthy, and they have a more stronger assessment, setup in the back end of the tool. This will help you to have a proper visualization about the extent of similarity of the research content in your paper with that which is available online in any of the published portals. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. So if I understand you correctly, there might be some plagiarism checkers that only look for freely available content and scan it against that, but not the articles that are behind a paywall, let's say, or
Yes.
within a university system or the preprint servers and so on.
Right.
Okay, perfect. So I hope that answers your question. While you can definitely use free softwares and you can very easily find them by searching them on Google or so on, you should look for the source of the plagiarism checker and ensure that it checks not just the internet content, but also published journal articles, because that's essentially what most publishers will be focusing on when they try to scan your manuscript for plagiarism check. We have another question here. Some journals ask authors to suggest potential reviewers. So how can I do it?
Right. So suggesting reviewers are a requirement for several journals, and this can be rightly done where some of the journals are very explicit in detailing how you can suggest the reviewers. Potentially, they should not be from your research team because this is to avoid any biasness in the review assessment process. And it would be advisable that you can look for the research papers that you have referred to and the authors there. You can approach these authors if they would be liking or they would be interested to review your paper, because it is in line on the similar lines with their research. You can also look for professors or researchers from other institutes other than yours, because that would also be a potential area where people may be interested to review your paper.
Is it a good idea to only recommend reviewers from your home country? Like, let's say, if you're from China and you suggest only Chinese reviewers?
Not essentially, because research is worldwide and your research will be read by people from across the globe.
Right.
It is ideally very much advisable that you go ahead and approach researchers from any country. And I feel that would be a rather more holistic approach.
Yeah. I think one of the questions, I remember facing when I was trying to publish, should you recommend reviewers who are not yet professors? That's something people worry about. What's your take on that?
Yes. So experienced professors would be the appropriate choice as reviewers, because basis the amount of knowledge and experience they have in your research area, you would be able to get a holistic opinion about the research strength or weaknesses, if any, that may exist in the paper. And this is how you can bring forth the best part of your research in the paper and go ahead with publication.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have one question here, which is, how many reviewers are ideal for a pre-submission review?
That would be definitely a decision at the journal editor's end, because
I think the author is, the attendee is referring to pre-submission. So prior to journal submission.
Prior to journal submission, ideally, at least 2 reviewers is advisable, because you would be having a diverse opinion on the same research paper. And this diversity in opinion can be taken as a benefit at your end to make all the enhancements in all the possible ways and get it to the standard of the target journal.
Yeah, for that matter, I believe Enago also provides multiple reviewers for each paper. We can provide up to 3. Yes. And that will definitely allow the author to get a more 360 review of their paper.
Right, Gayatri.
So there's another question, this time on journal selection part. Does the journal selection assistant take into consideration the narrow aims and scope of a journal? For example, a journal's geographical scope of target audience?
Yes, definitely. So this is where we have emphasized during our discussion that the aim and scope match of the journal with that of your research paper. Also, the expert looks into the articles that are published in the journal. So as you can see, we have stressed more for you to look into the recently published articles in the last 2 to 3 years. And this is how you can understand from these research papers, when you look into the author details, you will be able to understand the countries that have mostly preferred that particular journal to publish their paper. Of course, I would like to mention there are many more journals nowadays who have, upfrontly shared the region-specific distribution of their published articles. This is indeed a very essential information which most of the authors can take benefit of. Yeah, so I believe this is a very important aspect that the Enago expert do take into consideration and proceed ahead with the suggestions accordingly.
Just a similar question. Would it be a good idea to, let's say, draw parallels between, one Asian country to other Asian countries, and therefore focus more on Pan-Asian journals rather than a regional journal, let's say? Would that work?
In some cases, it may be helpful. But I mean, because sometimes the research that the paper has in it may be very much specific to that particular region. and the authors or the researchers of that region would benefit more because that would be from a future research development point of view.
Right.
So that's definitely at the expert's call, and that is how the decision is taken.
I think also end of the day, so long as you ensure that your research can have a global application,
Yes,
or a global perspective, you mention that specifically in your paper, then you can broaden the horizon a little bit more, right?
correct.
Yeah. So COVID related papers, for example, is definitely one of those subject areas, because it didn't matter which country the research was based in. All right, thank you. We have another plagiarism related question. Can you suggest some paraphraser website to avoid plagiarism? I'll actually Enago. So we are, I believe, in the process of making it available through you via our Trinka tools. Perhaps we can share more information about this later on. But as of now, I believe there's no auto paraphrasing tool that's available in the market. Obviously, it means that you need to be able to read the plagiarism report really well, identify which sections would be better edited. And I think one of the things that we pointed out in the presentation today is how you write the methodology, right? Sometimes you're so used to writing and explaining your method in a particular way, you can't think of how to write it differently. And that's where editing can come in handy. So perhaps online editing tools can also help.
Right.
I hope that answers your question, but definitely worth thinking about how to reduce plagiarism in a more automated way. Definitely. Thank you. All right. So it seems like we don't have any more questions. May I remind all attendees, if they have final few questions, please share them immediately in the chat or Q&A. Otherwise, we will now conclude the webinar. And thank you everyone for attending. It was a very informative session. Dr. Sujata Basu, thank you so much for your time. And please look out for our email with the coupon code and with other information that you will find helpful from this webinar. Thank you so much for attending, and have a good day, everyone.